I was hoping to present, I still am hoping to present my latest, but had a terrible night and couldn't get as much writing done as I hoped today, but I'll still be able to improvise something because there was progress, but it won't be nicely formatted. 1 second.
And what was it? Oh,
Yes.
what was it you were looking to present?
My latest work on fluid concepts.
Nice. That'll be very interesting.
Let's wait a bit more.
Yeah, Bentley and Joel said they both won't be making it.
Oh, okay. I missed that. Okay. Hangouts. Okay. Meetings and Joel. And I think, is Tim around?
He did say he added it to he finally imported it to the calendar.
So. To the calendar, yes. He finally found the calendar link.
Yeah.
Incredible. No, I think it's just the three of us. Okay. So yeah, I have text, but it's so unfinished. I'll ad lib a bit better. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've just been adding a bunch of the old documents that I found to like a Miro whiteboard to try and get like an overview of like, hey, what's going on with this, the vocabulary or the different conversations that have been had in the past.
I should look at the whiteboard to see if there's
something
that's missing. There's a lot of documents.
There's quite a few.
Yes.
And quite a few I have never seen before, which I want to just kind of dig into and see what that looks like.
Yeah, the vocabulary Trello you have, I'm sure.
For the vocabulary?
Yeah, the Trello with vocabulary.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen that.
Okay.
I was interested when I came across this. We had talked before about in the work packages document you had about domain layers modeling in the components, breaking the components down, breaking the layers down into components. And I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that after you were going to say something, but that'd be one thing I'd be interested in hearing.
In a way, the components are still relevant very much. There's a few that I'd probably combine in one box. And that's in the collabathon. I'm trying to get a first iteration of what I'm going to present now, which is a kind of concept distinction server, the distinction model and the concept distinction server. In the old document map, let's just, it would have been the concept unification distinction and maybe the community concept data boxes. And the identifier negotiation. So yeah, I'm combining a lot of boxes these days, but I'm really thinking about the algorithm. Let's get into it. I don't think anybody else is coming. So there's still this idea that, this hasn't changed. People have their own knowledge base, which I think of mostly as stream-based. There's these events, which are kind of language acts, where you're saying this idea, I believe this, I believe this, I believe this, I don't believe this. So these are mostly claims, actually, but the claims usually refer to concepts. And this is where the question is, what is a concept pointer? What does that look like? And that's what I'm really trying to focus on. And of course, the claims themselves are concepts. I believe this, this is also a higher level concept. So my notion of concept, AKA topic, AKA thought, but here we're looking at description, so I guess they're more symbols than thoughts. But the notion of concept includes, most tables you put in database are about singular entities, right? People, organizations, that kind of stuff. And singular entities are not the most ambiguous concepts. The problem is when you have abstractions. So what's a system? Does a system have a boundary? Does a system have to be designed, or can it be emergent? And so on and so forth. This is where you get into the fine distinctions. What's a concept? And so abstractions are where most of the debate happens. But as I said, when you're speaking, making a statement about abstraction, our classic example of the lockdown will cost more than the human cost of the pandemic. That's a complex statement with a greater than. There's an equivalence. There's a conversion factor. There's estimates of what's the likely cost of the lockdown, was the likely human cost of the pandemic, some equivalence factor between them. So there's a lot wrapped into that. And people could have totally different assumptions about how do you compute human cost and make that statement and seemingly agree at the statement with totally, totally different underlying assumptions and concepts. Hi, Tim. Yeah, you're there.
There it goes.
I was hoping to have a formal presentation, but insomnia, so I'm flying off the seat of my pants. Apologies for that.
It's okay. I'm late.
Yes.
Work is crazy. Work is crazy.
Okay. So,
but at least it's in my calendar, so I got here.
So just recapitulating past things that haven't moved. We have a flux of statements. Statements are concepts. They're composed of concepts. Concepts are a very generic thing that includes statements and claims and individual entities and abstractions over them. And it's abstractions that are the most problematic and the most ambiguous. And this is where you need to define a concept. And something I said before, I'm retreading old ground just to be clear that this has not moved. When we make a claim about a concept, the claim may be a defining claim or it may be an empirical claim. If I'm saying, my classic example, mammals give milk. Yeah, mammals give milk to their kids. And before I knew about platypus, I said mammals give live birth. Then I discovered the platypus, and we choose historically to stick to giving milk as the defining characteristic. So the word mammal expanded to encompass platypus and other monotremes. And there's only one other one, and whose name escapes me. And then the mammals give live birth was was confirmed as an empirical statement that could be proven wrong with new evidence, whereas the milk bearing was still the definitional characteristic of order Mammalia. It's in the name, but it had to be confirmed. We could have gone the other way. So
technically we can go both ways.
And sometimes
technically we go both ways, or we do go both ways. Yeah.
It could totally happen that in a situation, some people define it one way and other people define it another way, and there's a war of definitions, absolutely in scope.
Well, yeah, but getting back to this point of, like, I don't think there should be a war of definitions. I think you have two different claims using different definitions, and you say, okay, and this claim is true,
yeah.
Right.
So, okay, so what's a concept pointer? Now, there is one sense, and this is the thread of the needle. There is one sense where the concept evolves every time you make a statement about it. Your idea gets refined, your idea evolves, and every time you correct a comma in the definition, the concept evolves at one level. And that's just a fact. Your thinking gets refined as you talk about the idea. And there is another sense in which something stays constant through a lot of that evolution until you get to a distinguishing definition. Says, well, Some of them are like this, some of them are like that, and you start teasing the ambiguous concept apart. Like if there had been a war of words about mammalia, then we'd have said, okay, there's mammalia and there's eumammalia, or I think the order of after monotremes is, and those are two distinct concepts, and they now have different names. And the having live birth is the distinction between those, and the old naive pre-platypus mammalia concept has evolved to have one version that explicitly encompasses platypus, and one version with a name change that explicitly excludes them. So that when that happens, there's a distinction, and also important, there's examples. Now, the examples don't absolutely have to be real. They could be imagined, but there's, oh, you could see how this case would fit this definition and not that definition. And this is where a lot of people argue with edge cases. That's natural. We think with examples. And I think whenever you introduce an abstract term, it's good to give a prototypical example and maybe a few edge cases. And then people can argue about, would I include this edge case or not? And then you can see how that's one way to see how people have different definitions. Now, edge cases, they're by extension, it becomes a kind of power law. It's costly. The point is to use predicates to say, well, here is a more abstract concept, more abstract class, and all those that have this feature, that's what I mean. And that's predicate-based concept. And often a concept will have many definitional elements, ideally many predicates. Like it's entirely possible that you can even approach a concept from different abstractions and say, well, from this abstraction, here's the restriction, and from that abstraction, here's the restriction. And I think I arrived at the same concept. But that's also something that in mathematics, I'd say needs to be proven. In real life, I'd say needs to be claimed, and that claim verified. And if somebody finds evidence that, well, there's actually this case that fits in this one, but not that one, then okay, no, they're distinct. So the idea is, on the one hand, we have the concept evolved with every statement. And that, I think, still makes sense in your personal store. So you'd have local concepts with a history of all the claims made about that concept. You give a local concept identifier that I'm still talking about the same thing. And sometimes you'll even revise, oh, I used to believe this about this, but now I've changed my mind and now I believe this. But it's still the same concept. I was still trying to think about that. And even though it's changed in nature in that case, it's still, you're marking the continuity of your thought with a local identifier. The global in the federation, and maybe this could be made fractal. I'm still thinking about that. But right now, I'm just thinking of two levels, personal and federation. But in the federation, these microevolutions are, in a way, costly. They require too much. There's too many distinctions, and they are idiosyncratic, of course. So what you want to do is to say, well, here's the distinctions I'm using, and you put out the language. Here's the distinction, and the distinction should be made composed of concepts with, again, you probably have a local identifier for those concepts, but you give the, so to speak, projection to the global identifier space, to the federation identifier space. In the federation identifier space, its evolution is much slower. It's about changes that are shown to be substantial. So you can make statements and you're still, as long as you kind of say, oh, I'm making another statement about, oh, I think all mammals give live birth. That's an empirical claim. It's not changing the definition of mammals. You're just adding to that definition until somebody comes and says, you know what, I think there's a distinction here. Suppose there's not even platypus. They're not found. But we could say, is it always the case that live birth and milk bearing are connected? I'm not sure. So then you can make a hypothetical. Okay, these are distinct classes, though empirically so far, pre-platypus. We haven't found counterexamples, but you can make a mental distinction. What I'm saying is, what you have is a set of statements and a set of examples that can distinguish the statements if they exist, or even hypothetical. And then you have, but let's keep with the existing ones, and you have statements of containment. I'm saying, I think all there's no non-life bearing mammal that's, well, mammal as in milk bearing. There's no, I think there does not exist a non-life bearing milk bearing animal, I think. Proven wrong by the platypus later, but here I'm assuming pre-platypus. So the idea is you can propose an equivalence, and that is important in forming the lattice. So in a way, each proposition could be the start of a power set. Like you could have, let's distinguish all concepts by the power set of all propositions. But that's costly. And in practice, most of the time you can say this concept is formed by applying this proposition, sorry, blanking on the word, predicate, applying this predicate to this superclass, and you can make it into a lattice containment with meet and join formally. And again, this is tentative, but until contested. And the until contested, here we have to be careful about denial of service attack, and we'll probably need a threshold. Like, how many people actually believe that these things are distinct? How many people say this example is plausible? How many people say, and that's a bit hellish, but what I think it's worth, even if it's a bit arbitrary, what's important is the ability to distinguish when is the change of definition substantial. If I correct a comma, I've changed the identity of my definition in CID terms, but I haven't changed, in most cases, the substantial definitions. And so I can say, I think this is the same definition. I'm just refining, clarifying, adding information, until somebody comes and says, no, I think you've created substantial difference. The community embraces that. And then you say, okay, I need to fork the concept. And need to fork the concept means the old one gets obsolete, and then you create this version, and maybe the common abstraction. Tim.
Yeah, so you're struggling with problems that I don't wish to have in the canonical debate, right? We have this split of focuses, right, where you worry about communities and federation, and under your view, the canonical debate might be one entity in this federated thing that has a view of, a very flatter view of things, right? A more fixed view of things. But even in the a lot of what you're saying is the same concern of the canonical debate, in my view, especially when I'm talking about primary keys, unique keys for claims. This is all part of that, right? And under that vision, to me, where you have a substantial fork is exactly at the point where in the system you have claims with significantly different outcomes in terms of and this requires the scoring and the belief to have that be significant. But it's significant people agree that under this one concept, this is true, and under a different concept, it's not, right?
Right.
And then you have a fork of the concepts.
Yeah, I still believe that ultimately the best way to do that is to, what I'm trying to describe, the interface between the individual drift of a concept and the collective, much coarser drift of the concept equivalence class. And I don't think you can avoid that correspondence. And I'll get into—
Well, that's where I talk about flattening out, because my solution to these problems is kind of an eye of the beholder type thing, where you define your concept as you want and you create your definitions, and then the claims let the claims fall as they may based on your.
The question is, when you say you, I mean, there's someone implicit here. I mean, there's still operators even in your system, and you've spoken about context. The idea is a claim, a bare claim.
It's not a standalone claim.
A standalone claim. Sorry, a standalone claim. No, not standalone. Bare. I did mean bare.
I forgot the definition. Go ahead. Yeah.
A decontextualized claim. A claim stripped of its provenance.
Okay.
A bare claim may be true in a certain context and false in another. And everything I'm saying about people, you can translate it to contexts. Like you had the notion of
I would have to have an example because I disagree. I mean, there's true and false in terms of the belief of the reader, and that's the only context that changes in my vision of this, right?
No, there can be, you can say things a certain way in a certain field, and if you move that claim in another field, it means something totally different and nonsensical.
Okay, but I would
context
argue that moving into a different field, the question is how fully formalized is this claim, right? If assuming a fully formalized claim where you have established your definitions or your concepts, that there's no drift, right? There's no context.
When I say, okay, first, I think fully formalized is always asymptotic. It's
correct.
Formalized up to a point. Second, I am not speaking about formalized point here. When I said bare claim, I'm taking a sentence stripped from, extracted by force from an article, and then you try to read that sentence from another.
Right. I wouldn't even say, I would call it ambiguity, right?
Yes,
and
that's
because
what I'm
it hasn't been
talking
formalized.
about.
That's fine. Okay, I accept there's ambiguity.
But what I'm saying is okay, that's first. Second, even formalized, there's still remaining ambiguity. We might not, you and I may not interpret faux friend in the same way. For example, faux friend is
no, I agree with that, but like I would deal with this from the approach of when you hit ambiguity that is substantial, you solve it by forking and creating.
This is exactly the process I'm describing.
Okay.
I'm that process of you have something that, and then you discover ambiguity because sometimes it's not obvious. You realize it's ambiguous when somebody interprets it differently. And I insist that it's somebody interprets it differently. Oh, I thought this case was covered. And that's when you realize, no, you didn't hear it the same way I did. And that's when you realize, okay, there's a distinction to be added here to make it clear that, no, this case was not meant to be added in at least one interpretation, and it was meant to be in another interpretation. So it's not standalone enough. It was standalone until somebody misinterpreted otherwise. And you discovered that in time. That's my basic posit, is that ambiguities are discovered in time. And so the process of what I'm saying is the concept lattice is continuously evolving. We have the predicates form a lattice, and we claim, okay, this is probably contained in that, and then somebody say, well, yes, but no, I thought of this case, and this is, and then argue, does this case fall under this? Does this case fall under that? Yes, people agree it falls under this and not that. So no, it's not fully contained. And the lattice changes as we think of new cases, as we think of new distinctions. And the idea is these are quote unquote events. So, and now I'll speak from my personal standpoint, and that part you're absolutely free to say is not in Canonical Debate Lab scope. I see myself as having a set of claims that I've endorsed locally in my knowledge base with both a local identifier that, as I said, follows a thread of continuous change very precisely, and the mapping to the global lattice, the federated lattice, or to the CDL terms. It should be the same idea, to something that is kind of canonical concept lattice at one moment. And I've pointed to that. And when a new distinction is established, because basically I make a new statement and then we realize there's a misunderstanding, we make a distinction, the concept gets forked, and then ideally, the way I see it, when we make that fork, we mark the original concept as obsolete or having been forked or whatever, however we want to do it. We create the new concepts and we say, well, the abstracting case is this one and the two branches of the alternative are this one and maybe n branches. And people who were using concepts that map to that personal concepts, that map to that old global concept, get notified. And then what I expect to happen is, for most people, their personal concept will map to one of the branches of the alternative or the common abstraction, doesn't matter. And then they'll be able to do that. And that means that all the claims that they personally endorsed, they say, I believe this, I believe that, I believe this, I believe that, can be automatically rewritten with the new identifier, because it used to be this one and now they've picked a side, so to speak. Oh, I used to mean this one, and hence I can rewrite my claims. And so if I'm trying, and I know this may not be a CDL thing, but I think—
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that happen. I guess, like, in my view, what you had was a more abstract claim, or a more abstract concept, or I would call it a definition for now, right? And you were agreeing to all these claims using the more abstract one. And at the moment you're forking, you're actually creating two new, more specific definitions, right? So you have
two specific and one abstract.
Yeah, and so you could assume that, well, there was agreement. Those people agreed on the previous existing claims with the more specific ones as well, because I hadn't disagreed, even though they were viewing. Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. I have to. Yeah, I mean,
my hypothesis is that we may find out that some people were thinking about one fork all along and didn't think about the abstraction.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So the abstraction.
No, I think they can agree. I think you can assume they agreed with the abstraction, because they already did agree with the abstraction, and they would agree with their fork copy of that, but you can't assume they agree with the other forked copy.
I'm saying I won't assume that they agreed with the abstraction. That's exactly what I'm saying, because it's possible that they had already chosen a fork implicitly without articulating it, without being even aware that, how could someone think that? It's obvious to me.
But except that that is inherent in the abstraction. That's part of the abstraction, is the fact that it could be interpreted one of two ways. And so but the fact that it is.
Yes, but what I'm saying is they used the word that was ambiguous, right? But for some of them, it was obvious that they meant this subcase, because they cannot, like, how is the first case even thinkable? And so
but what I would say is the ambiguous version didn't change. It's still the ambiguous version. So either you take the posture that they did agree with that ambiguous version because they were thinking of one of the possible, what did we call it? I forgot what you call it when you make more specific a resolution, clarifications of it, whatever. One of the different interpretations. It's like one of the interpretations they agreed with. So you can agree with it because there's something in the ambiguity that makes them agree with it. Or you say, once you've forked it, nobody can agree with the abstraction.
Yes.
Or at least unless they agreed with both sides, right?
Which is a case.
It is a case.
What I have is say, mark the, I call it the naive concept, the one that didn't know about the distinction. Mark that one as obsolete. Whether we want to reuse identifier for the abstraction, I would tend not to. Mark that one's obsolete, so everybody gets notified. Hey,
Okay, but like let's talk about
concept.
the question of immigration, right? That one where you have
Yeah.
general to specific is one of the kinds of abstraction. I don't think that we declare general claims as
That's not what I'm
obsolete.
saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if somebody just put in immigration as a concept in the system and didn't specify subcases and there's no distinction, and then somebody comes and says, you know, we really need to distinguish refugees from economic immigration from something else. And then, you know what, if you were talking about immigration in general, it may be valid. Maybe you were talking about immigration in general, but please be explicit that this is what you're doing. So what I'm saying is there's a naive version, immigration before the distinction is introduced, and that one is obsolete. There's
and that, yeah, in that case, then you're talking about incremental formalization, and maybe when something goes from less formalized to more formalized, the less formalized version is obsolete.
That's exactly, yeah, I wouldn't call it.
Stephen would say no, but I would, I
Yeah,
would say yes. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I wouldn't call it exactly incremental formalization, incremental precision. I'm calling it lattice evolution now, but yes,
Okay.
Exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
We're going from, you know, fuzzy concept to more precise concepts, of which.
No, but you could have increased, like, I would say, if you have immigration and you didn't even supply a definition for immigration, versus you say immigration, you formalize it by applying it, you're still just as abstract, right?
Well, no, exactly. But what I'm saying is, if I'm saying immigration, and I mean, whether I say it or not, whether refugees or economic immigration, like the common abstraction, what I keep calling the common abstraction. If I mean that, I'm saying it's a different concept than if I didn't think about it. For me, it's an explicitly different concept if I explicitly include both branches.
Okay. Yeah, it certainly plays out differently in.
It plays out differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I understand.
And that's why I'm saying, in terms of the lattice, I had 1 point and now I have 3 points, and I want the, well, I have.
But I'm not sure anything ever becomes obsolete under that. Like, when does something become obsolete? I'm not.
It becomes obsolete when you realize that it's a polarizing ambiguity, and you want to say, okay, let's force people to be explicit whether they mean this one, or both, which is a case. I'm not saying let's not have the common abstraction, but I'm saying even the both explicit is different from the indistinct blob they had before. That's not super important. For me, it forces a shift of mentality about what's a concept. We could reuse identifiers, I guess, for the common abstraction, as long as we put, you really need to look at that distinction and take a position, how you feel about it. And maybe your position will be, I want both sides, and that's fine. But there has to be, but I think one clear way to do it is to say, well, the naive concept is obsolete, and please now use one of the, either the new one for the common abstraction or the new ones for one of the branches, and make that explicit. So basically, you're mapping your local concepts to global identifiers, and that means all of your, if you, in most cases, people will go from, oh, my local concept mapped to this indistinct identifier. I usually meant this one, and that means there's a global, they have a local equivalence table. My local concepts corresponds to this globally, and they'll just rewrite all their claims, which use local concepts, very precise ones, with a date and the state of my knowledge base at that point. It's mapped to a global claim, a claim using global identifiers, and that mapping can be recalculated automatically, because most of the time they'll just choose one of the branches or the abstraction, which is sometimes they'll say, oh, sometimes I meant this one, sometimes I meant this one, and then they have to review their claims. Oh, when did I mean what? And that's,
and when you say rewrite a claim, does that become a new claim?
it becomes the way I see it. I think people should expose their local ultra precise claim and the projection into global space, the coarsening into the equivalence classes of the lattice. And the coarsening gets rewritten. Yes, it becomes, you need the coarsening so that you can know, from my standpoint again, how many people believe this, right? And it'll turn out that people will make the claims that are substantially different because at the local level, they look different, but they map to the same claim. And that's why it's an equivalence relation. And you try to make the equivalence relation modulo distinguishable concepts in the lattice. Like there's this predicate that distinguishes this concept from that concept. And that's predicates being endorsed as meaningful by the community. And especially, and that's why, because I want to know which predicates are endorsed as meaningful by community, this is why I want to know who endorses the claim, in the case of the defining claims at least. And this is why I need the equivalence relation. Because again, my claim is hyper-precise in a way because it's idiosyncratic, but I need to map it to a common space to know who believes this, or how many people believe something that seems equivalent so far. And again, maybe it's not equivalent. Maybe we'll introduce a new distinction because it's not equivalent, but seems equivalent so far with the distinctions we have in the lattice so far. And if it's not enough, then people can come back and say, well, missing something here. And then their claim will be remapped to the global claim language, so to speak. So the idea is really, I think we need both identifiers. We need the one that tracks your individual claim evolution, because that's how you know which state previous claims to remap. And you need the federation, global, CDL perspective, doesn't matter, that flattens them to equivalence classes according to those distinctions that have been, endorsed by the community. So I'm trying to make and again, this could be fractal. I very much see this being fractal, but right now I'm just thinking about the two extremes of the fractal because it's easier for me to do. The lattice should be a CRDT, like the individual knowledge base I see very much as event-based, and hence it has total ordering because my own speech acts are totally ordered. And I can say, what did I believe at the time I made that statement? Why did I say that? Oh, I can say it's obsolete, and so on and so forth. In the case of the lattice, say I believe maybe there's too many definition elements attached to a concept. I'll just take the top view and hope that I'll let go of the marginal. Oh yeah, that's a technical requirement. For any concept, you can ask, what are the most consensual definition elements? And what are the most polarizing definition elements? And so it should be easy to get quickly to a point where you accept and situate, accept the first and situate the second. So, okay, you don't have to look at all the definitions that exist. You're pretty much aligned on this concept, most likely. There might be an interesting exercise in fuzziness here. I'm thinking about that one a bit, but it may also be misleading. But I'm thinking about the point where there's many, many people proposing definition elements, and we want to say, okay, which one is the most seen as the most clear and illuminating and descriptive by the most people. But that's a bit of a side issue. What is important is we can do equivalence class of definition elements that are substantially equivalent versus empirically equivalent versus provably non-equivalent, and use that to populate the lattice and make it into a lattice, and an evolving lattice with these forking concepts. And that I see as distributable. So the difficulty for me was making the I was trying to think, what is the concept identifier? Is it this thing that changes all the time because the concept evolves all the time? Or is it this kind of more fixed thing? And I realize it has to be both. Like I have to store locally for me both the local concept identifier that tracks the thread of my evolution and make it correspond. And that can change. And at this point, I made it correspond to this concept. At that point, I made it correspond to that concept. And it may change, not because the concept got obsoleted, but because I changed my mind. And that's fine. It's just this thing that I call this, what do I think it is out there? What is the common concept? And seeing that I need to keep both and keep the mapping alive is, so to speak, the latest development for me. Then basically I'm working on making this into a data structure, making sure that I have a CRDT. I think the distinctions between distinctions, examples, and tentative containment structures, saying, I think all cases of this are contained in that or not. I have most cases. Maybe I'll need something else for coverage. I think this category is exhausted by this category and this category, and these three subcategories cover all the cases. That's, I think, or these n subcategories cover all the cases. That may be another primitive of the system. I'm trying to express it in terms of the other ones. I think with containment, that'll probably be okay. But yeah, I'm trying to prove that this forms a CRDT, which I think it does. So that's where I'm at. And sorry, I don't have the structures ready, and I'm still working on them, and I didn't manage to finish the structures yet. But the notion of dual identifier and of making the global identifier change when there is community approval that the difference is substantial and not before. The difference is assumed non-substantial until approved otherwise.
So what do you mean by changed? Because the reason I ask is I think concepts should be static and have their own ID, and then when you fork, you're creating new ones. They're related, and they don't have to be related just through a line that connects them. But I see their relation being shared structure. Like we've talked about this, where you have the different definitional statements or whatever, all the pieces that go together that make up this thing. If you are forking it by adding, like, say your definition of mammals is all that and platypuses, right? Essentially what you've done is you've taken all the work before and you've added one definitional sentence that says also includes platypuses, right? And so there's a natural relationship between them because they share these other concepts, and it's that sharing that provides the linkage.
Okay, there's two things. There's are we changing the definition of mammals? Adding platypus doesn't change the nominal definition. It changed an empirical fact because we agreed to stick with the nominal definition we had. Some people, I think, possibly I should check that because I keep using that example. Maybe some people thought live birth was also a defining characteristics of mammal and had to relent, possibly or not. I don't know, but let's assume they did. So maybe the definition changed or not. But there's another phenomenon. There's that substantial change. Is there substantial change? In this case, we had a new example. We had an empirical statement that was disproven, but we kept the definition. And there's another thing, which is definition drift. If you've looked at old encyclopedias, they're slightly quaint. And
Right,
no,
but what I would say is that's kind of a missing premise, or a missing piece of the definition, which is the temporal nature of it, right?
no, but
Every
that's
definition has secretly within it this kind of temporal, as used at this point of time or whatever.
But what I'm saying is, okay, look at Wikipedia edits.
But wait, I think, no, let me just like, I think what happens there is the word as used. It surfs over changes in definitions, which means like that word is getting reused for different meanings over time. But those old definitions didn't vanish. It's just that people aren't using those anymore. They're still there.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about something distinct. I'm talking about the simple fact that people edit Wikipedia in many cases, for example, adding information, clarifying, changing a bloody comma, changing the definition without changing either the intention or the extension of the meaning of the term. In most cases, sometimes they do, but in most cases, most Wikipedia edits are not substantial changes. And I'm saying insubstantial changes are necessary because we come to a word, we try to understand it according to whatever baggage we have in a given era, in a context. And as the culture changes, the way we define the exact same concept has to evolve. The definition has to evolve because the tools we use to understand it have changed, the rest of the culture in which this concept is embedded, even if it's the exact bloody same concept. So I'm saying,
I would say, that like the evolution of the concept, they're either it's evolving to become sort of more robust, it's reinforcing. We've learned more about it, and everything we add to it doesn't break any of the previous claims and agreements that it was used for.
Exactly.
Or it hits some change where it breaks it, right?
Exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly.
Yes.
And trying to say, when do we know that it's a case of one or the other? Because sometimes subtle, seemingly clarifying things, you accumulate them enough and the concept has drifted. So when can you say, okay, the concept has drifted? It's about, well, can I establish?
I would do it empirically. Yeah, I can't. Yes.
Exactly what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is,
yeah.
Let's make that formal, that if we can establish a distinction, even after the fact, then we can say, okay, this is the moment where the distinction had this inflection point because this new case can now plausibly be included and couldn't, or vice versa. And then we can fork and obsolete the old one and say, okay, there's a new distinction here, there's a new ambiguity, blah, 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 blah. But making that precise is exactly what I'm saying we need to do.
Yeah, I do. Again, you're saying obsolete, and I think when you say obsolete, I think you're meaning like it doesn't work for people anymore. People shouldn't use this anymore.
Well, they shouldn't use that identifier. They shouldn't use that UUID. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, but yeah, the moment is okay, but maybe I'm trying to think of, for example, the case of Pluto losing its planet status, right?
Good example.
I mean, it's maybe not a good example because it's so explicit, and its use that anybody can call Pluto a planet. You can still call it a planet. It's the people who say you can't are I forget the name of the organization of astronomical standards organization, whatever. They're like, we should not. This is our new definition for planet. And whenever we say planet, we should always mean this, right?
Yeah, it's a community of practice, and they have a technical definition for a technical usage. Perfectly valid. And the technical usage is not the main usage. But yeah, I agree. The word Pluto has not become obsolete. But the concept of Pluto as planet, in some way, like when you say Pluto now, you should be aware, oh, by the way, it's contested.
So let's think about the definition of Pluto and the statement Pluto is a planet, the claim Pluto is a planet, right? Yep. At some point, before there was this debate or whatever, you could have said, let's create a definition for Pluto. Oh, and Pluto is a planet, is part of its definitional claims, right?
Yeah.
Pluto is a planet. But when you said planet, you were using a concept, right?
And now we've basically forked planet into planet and Plutoids, I think they're even called, or planetoids, I don't remember. And so
dwarf planets.
Dwarf planets, thank you.
Yeah.
So we forked the old concept. Now, actually, that's a great case because planet.
What happened to Pluto? The definition at that point.
But it's not what happened to Pluto. It's what happened to planet. That's really interesting. Planet used to cover Pluto as an example, and now we forked the planet concept, and the pre-change notion of planet is in a way obsolete. Now, when we think planet, when we say planet, we should think, oh, do I mean planet or dwarf planet or both? Right? I could still say, I don't know if there's a name for the abstraction that covers planets and dwarf planets. There should be. I don't think there is.
There is. I can't remember it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent.
I'm curious of when though this actually comes to be an issue. Like in a claim, if I use the word planet,
that's what we mean that by being empirical. That's what we mean. You can continue using planet in the pre-fork meaning, like the colloquial thing, and still make claims that are still valid, right? Because you could say like planets have gravity, right? And you meant to include dwarf planets in that, right? You were trying to make the more general statement of planets have gravity, right?
Well, asteroids have gravity, but let's say planets have enough gravity to have a moon, whether they do or not, like Mercury and Venus don't, but they could have a moon in theory. So they have enough gravity for a moon, which is still true of Pluto. So your notion of planet would encompass the common abstraction.
When I make the claim, I link to what that concept was at that time.
Correct.
So then what is the issue? Is what I'm still...
No, but you link to the definition you are wanting to use if you're formalizing it, right? If you're formalizing it and you really wanted to say both planets in the modern definition and dwarf planets in the modern definition, and you want to do it by using the old definition of planets, this is a moment where I'm saying the old definition isn't really obsolete. It becomes confusing to people who are reading, right? It maybe shouldn't be used in that sense, but you can make claims using that definition and have them still be totally true and be what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying to say, because the concept has been forked, you should not use that UUID. And by the way, I want to be clear, it's not the name, it's not even the concept, but I'm saying you should.
Okay, but let's
go further. I'll go further. You should not use that naive thought anymore. You should always be aware when you're using the word planet, oh, do I mean planet excluding or including dwarf planets? And I should be clear about that. So,
but let's go back in time. Let's go back in time. The claim was made before the fork.
Exactly.
Right? What happens to that claim after the fork? And what happens to the definition of Pluto after the fork, right?
Exactly.
If Pluto is a planet and now it's a dwarf planet.
Exactly what I described earlier. When planet gets forked, the concept planet gets obsolete. The old claim that pointed to that concept, the person gets notified, hey, the notion of planet has changed. There's a new distinction. You have all these claims about planets. Did you always mean planet including dwarf planet or planet excluding dwarf planet? I'll assume nobody will expect you to always have meant dwarf planet. And then you can say global always this, global always that, or hey, damn, I have to review my statements case by case because some of them would only apply to full planets and the other could apply to both. That's exactly what I'm saying. The old statements, you have it in your personal knowledge base. It was pointing to something, you get notified of the change, and then you adjust. If you're dead, but go ahead.
Yeah, but this doesn't quite answer my question of what happens to Pluto, the definition. Because
you have the history of having made the precise claim using the old definition. It remains in your history. That was this.
No, but like you may be mixing definitions in the same set of claims or whatever, because what you have is concepts. You have a concept that is forked, and you have definitions that use that concept,
yes,
that you may use for the same claim.
Correct.
Right. So, you know, when we fork planet, and you have a whole solar system full of planets, and each one is a planet as its definition, are you, do they get new identifiers? Are you splitting off? I mean, you can't do, because planet got split into, well, it got a new definition, and you create a new definition of dwarf planet, and you don't actually know at that moment whether all these other definitions are still valid, or rather, you know that they have not, the new definitions have not been created yet, but you can't automatically fork them the way you can with a claim. You can't fork a definition automatically. You have these cascading definition forking based on that one definition that is forked.
And what I'm saying is, collectively you cannot, but individually you can. Individually, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, you'll look at all your claims you've made and you're like, I usually meant including dwarf planets. Oh, or I usually meant, no, I don't care, excluding dwarf planets. And you can probably do a bulk, not a bulk, not even a bulk operation. You're just saying my usage of planet, my local identifier, I'm now redirecting to either the including or excluding dwarf planet global identifier. It used to be to the old identifier, which is now obsolete. I just changed the pointer to one of the new identifiers, and all my old claims would get bulk rewritten with the new projection. They still have their full history in my personal history, but their projection changes. Now, I may have to review some of them, and this is not true anymore, blah, blah, blah. But in some cases, individually, I'm like, oh, sometimes I meant one, sometimes I meant the other. I have to review my claims one by one. That's the interesting case. But what's really important is if different people reroute their personal local identifiers, sometimes to one, sometimes to the other, and then claims that used to be pointing to the same global claim projection now point to two different global claim projection. So people who were in the illusion of agreement are now known to disagree. That's really interesting. That's really what I want to capture. The fact that there was an illusion of agreement that was based on ambiguity and that is revealed by this.
Sorry, background noise.
Life.
I'm troubled. I'll have to think through this a little more. I'm troubled by the cascade of impact on other definitions when a fork happens.
I think it's a useful cascade. I think it's a very useful cascade. It will cascade. There is an update. The cascade may have many steps, but in many cases, it will stop being substantial after a few steps. That's a bit hypothetical, but I think it's true. I think in many cases, it will be substantial for some time.
Well, let me try to work out loud some of my
concerns.
Yeah, concerns, or just trying to imagine what's happening here.
Yeah.
Because Pluto is a real thing out in the real world, right? Okay.
We're still talking about the same Pluto before and after changing the planet.
Right. It's actually out there. We created a new definition of planet.
Yes.
So we defined Pluto as, different characteristics. I don't know which, this is one of the problems, is I don't know what should be a definitional concept or a definitional claim for Pluto. I haven't gone through that exercise. And actually, the point is of definitions, you can start small and you can build on more. But which ones are definitional and which ones aren't is the problem. But so is essentially Pluto is a planet in the solar system, right? Okay, that becomes Pluto. When we fork, Pluto is still an old definition planet in the solar system. It is also now a dwarf planet in the solar system in the new. So the more definitions you have that apply to it, it starts collecting all these different versions of definitions that are
Which is
referring to the
fine.
same thing, because it hasn't changed. It hasn't. You don't have a new.
Yeah. And there you have a point. I didn't get into that. I did think about it at some point, but I didn't say it yet in this hour. We could have both definitions coexist. And again, as long as people are clear if we want to keep the old definition of planet, we may, as long as people are clear which one they use. And it's also clear to me that there can be multiple definitions for an abstract concept and even for a concrete concept like Pluto. Concrete meaning an instance as opposed to a class. And there can be multiple competing definitions, and it's a claim that they all refer to the same entity, and this is what I'm calling the containment claims. Claim that this definition and that definition have exactly the same extension. Right, that's a containment claim, really, or have a subset of the extension. That's more general case. Venn diagram. What's the Venn diagram case for the extension of these two concepts? And here it's claiming they're the same. Cool. And a fortiori there exists a unique object with those characteristics, with this definition. This is even stronger. The claim of coextension is even stronger with unique definitions. Individual definitions. And as I said, there's many of them, and there can be many of them. So at some point we'll say the first planet, the first planet after Neptune, and then hopefully we won't find one in between, because then we'll have to change the definition.
Yeah. So what happens when a definition is wrong?
It happens. Then you revise the definition and you say, okay, this definition has now been shown to be empirically invalid. Like if we had put has milk and has live birth in the mammal definition, we'd have been forced to revise the definition. Or we could have, as I said, defined to apply it to Mammalia and give another name to the Mammalia clade, but what is now the Mammalia clade. But sometimes we revise definitions. Sometimes definitions are wrong. It's the real question, what makes a definition is, if this were false, are you learning something else about this set of objects, or are you thinking of another set of objects? Would you have another name for this if this were false? This is what a definition is, as opposed to an empirical claim. It's something that would make you see, oh no, that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about something else. That's what a definition is. And sometimes you know what you're talking about, and you realize that the rules, the definition elements you use to point it out are not true, or you've had to refine them or whatever. You still know what you're talking about. You're still talking about Pluto. You have to change the definition. You have to change the singling out predicates. And this old singling out predicate might now be designating another object. Like if we say Pluto is the most heavy object outside of the Neptunian orbit, the most heavy trans-Uranian, well, now there's a planet that's heavier. There's a dwarf planet that's heavier than Pluto somewhere in the trans-Uranians. So I'm not going to call that Pluto suddenly. And that's happened. That's not a hypothetical. Pluto is not the heaviest dwarf planet. It's still Pluto. Definitions change, and that's why the lattice changes. It's another case of obsolescence. You're obsoleting.
So what? No, okay, but so we have these definitional claims that make up the definition, right?
Yep.
And like I was my approach to definitional claims was they're taken for granted, they're not to be debated, and you use those to have your to form your claims that are to be debated. And then you have this traumatic moment where one of the definitional claims is proven false.
Yep.
Or there's disagreement about it, right?
And then you have,
in that case, I would say the system could make that definition obsolete. It could,
if it's proven false and there's agreement,
or whatever. If there's
debate, it's like a git with two heads. It happens, and they have to be presented as such. This is polarizing. We're not sure about this one. This is a polarizing definitional element, and you have to have the list of polarizing.
But that doesn't capture. Well, yeah. What's weird is the question of, oh, it's the most massive object outside of Neptune, and then another one is found. Like you said, what if you take the definition at face value, what it's done is change the concept. The concept switched from one object to another, right? It just kind of poop. But the system can't really catch that one. I don't see how you could programmatically capture that one, because
yes, because of the co-occurrence. See, somebody defined it this way, and somebody had defined using the average distance from the sun. And there was
right. So if you had two that were in opposition, right, one of them has to be wrong.
And then they stop coinciding, and so one of them has to be revised.
That's interesting. But if you're, because like we said, that like definitions can accumulate.
Yep.
Definitional claims, but you can always just start, for example, Pluto is that dot right there in the telescope, right? And then you start talking about all sorts of things, and it turns out, oops, no, actually it was that dot or whatever. You can start with a definition that is just a one-liner. And in that case, they were wrong, or this new object was found, and we would like you to not be able to call that thing Pluto, but really what happens is the concept has shifted. I don't know.
Some identifying claims are wrong. That's okay. Claims have a lifespan also, right? They start as questions, and then they're hypothesis, and then they're considered established, and then they're doubted, and then they're
what's weird is what happens in the case that all the definitional claims are wrong for something. If you just had Pluto is the most massive thing outside of Neptune, and then another one is found, and it shifts the concept, what would happen in the system is actually it would be all the empirical claims made from that definition would suddenly be wrong, because the concept, the definition pointed at a different concept all of a sudden.
Historically, what would happen is people would notice that and say, wait a minute. all these empirical claims are wrong. Something happened. I don't.
Yeah. It would have to. It could get highlighted in the system empirically. It would just take a while. Yeah. Is what I'm saying.
My aim is not full automation. My aim is full representability, and I still claim in terms of representability.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
You can have multiple definitions, claim that they coincide, and suddenly they stop coinciding. That's good enough for me.
And that all makes sense. The problem is the complexity. Like actually making this thing work with all this complexity, and people managing all this complexity. It's got to have
It's not
automation
nothing.
or AI or something helping. Yeah.
Ugh, I'm trying to avoid that. I think it's not that bad, because if you focus on examples, like people are, I don't know how good people are at doing set theory, not that good, I expect, but people are pretty good at finding examples. Oh, can you think of something that fits here and that doesn't fit there? Yeah, maybe I can. And you have to couch it that way. Like, can you populate that intersection or set difference or whatever? And you don't say set difference because people won't get that, but you say, is there something that isn't there and not in there? Maybe. I think that's not over people's head. And it's easy to translate from one to
It's
the other.
functional. It's usable.
It's functional. Yeah.
It's interesting.
But yes, I have to build it now.
Yeah. But there's yeah. I should probably get going. We're over time.
Yep.
But the one idea that is floating around in here right now is creating a definition through definitional claims and adding on to them, like a rubber band ball, versus taking two different things and saying they're the same thing. And then what happens? Do they accumulate? I mean, there's a decision-making process, and we've talked about how not everybody has to agree with it, and that to me is untenable, because then you don't have usable definitions if you have people disagreeing.
And this is why I do want the people and like you, because I'm willing to say, well, most people think this definition makes sense to them. Let's go with that one. And most people are polarized on this one. So this is one you have to position yourself on, because it is a source of disagreement. So we need to know. And having those two parallel statistics on each definitional claim. How consensual is it? How polarizing is it?
And this is why, my default approach is there is a person that creates a definition, and then you're not debating the definition. The person creates their definition.
And that's an oligarchy, and I won't have that personally.
No, there's no oligarchy. No, anybody can create a definition.
Okay, fair enough. But
then if you don't like that definition, you create your own definition. And this is very useful in the debates about
no, that's fine. That's fine. But then the problem is you still have to make sure that when people create a definition, they relate the definitions by containment, so that you don't have a power set, you have a lattice. A. B has to control but that's doable. And then what if people lie and introduce this information in the system? Like, this is why I'm interested in the statistical aspect.
But, right.
It's not just
what I was thinking with is like climate change, right? So everybody has their definitions of climate change or whatever, and you can define your climate change. Once you've defined it, people, you can say, oh yeah, under that definition, this is true. Under a different definition, which is what I was working with, you can see that's not true. And you see there are different definitions, and that's reasonable. Yeah. And if your debate is whether or not it's anthropogenic, if one of the definitions is it's a phenomenon caused by man, you're begging the question with one of them, right? And the system could probably detect somehow the circular reference there, right? One of the definitions, you're begging the question. The other one, okay, we're having this debate, right?
Somehow we're still having this debate. Yes. All true. It's not. Yeah, my concern is not so much just spamming. It's sabotage, which is distinct. I mean, we're speaking about the
attack vectors. I understand, but
yeah, you do.
I mean, what would be an attack? I mean, I can think of it in terms of the transgender debates.
It's a very great. Right? It's a very great example. Yes,
where somebody chooses an intentionally narrow or harmful or insulting definition, right? And yet that is used in practice. That does happen in practice. And I wouldn't consider that sabotage. I would consider that a reflection of how people are doing it, as opposed to.
No, that's not sabotage, it's distinct. But yes, hate speech as a definition is going to be another concern. We'll need moderation.
Sure.
What's the
But
slur?
it's the fact that people have to define it. You know, the
the
sabotage
slurs
would be if the definition intentionally is the opposite or doesn't match, just to throw confusion into which one they're picking on. They pick one that doesn't. Yeah.
When you try to put, for example, social security as a form of fascism, that's sabotage.
Okay. Yeah, I think the system could handle that sort of thing, because you could see, so. Like you said, the lattice, you can see the commonalities between definitions. You know, this one is not like the other. In fact, it's got an opposite claim. It's using the not of one of the claims in there.
This is a polarizing definition. Some people agree with it and some people think it's spurious. And they have reasons why it's spurious, you know? Right.
I think this is all very, very cool, very fascinating. I want to see it in practice so bad. Yeah. I think it's going to cover 90% of the real world debate.
All of us.
All of parts of the claims. Yeah. Will be easy.
Okay. So I think I said my piece mostly. I don't know. Like for me, the real important part is the process of aligning the personal and the collective. I know it's not what you landed on, but for me, that was the kind of linchpin.
No, I understand. But you know, it's not that I see it out of the scope of the CDL of the canonical debate. I don't see it out of the scope of what would be needed in the canonical debate ecosystem. Obviously, right. People need tools to work on their own offline quickly and that sort of thing, and then need to figure out how to fit. Just if you want to construct your own argument map and insert it back in, you're going to want to do that quietly and quickly.
But it's not just that. My real concern is, if I make a claim and you make a claim, is it the same claim? Well, it depends on our definitions. There's a recursivity there. You know, the update cascade is also right. Reality that way, because I was afraid, you know, oh, I'm changing that concept, which changes that definition, which changes that concept, which is used in that claim, which is used as a definition for that concept. Yeah, it's frightening. On the other hand,
control, yeah.
On the other hand, not doing it means, you know, we have different claims. No, we have the same claim. We think it's the same claim. It's described as the same claim, but we actually disagree, and we'll never know it. And
this is also where, like, sort of an automated relevance score would be interesting.
It's not just relevance. It's about being able to find how is it different?
No, but okay. Yeah, but that's the relevance score. Automated relevance score is something that highlights. It's one of those things you use to detect where there's mismatches. It's just part of it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the other question is the lattice structure maintainable out of these personal threads? I think so now, which I wasn't sure for a while.
All right. Well, thank you.
So that's where I'm at.
This has been fun after a long absence. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you. All right, guys. Have a good weekend.
Ciao, ciao.
See you next. It's next Wednesday, right? See you Wednesday.
Yes. See you Wednesday.
See you then.
Bye-bye.